That's kind of cool.
Yes.
Yelena Kigmenovic is the founder and director of the Arlington, DC Behavior Therapy Institute, and she's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University Psychology Department. She's an expert in cognitive behavioral therapy. She has over 25 years of experience with psychotherapy, teaching, public speaking, and research. And I first saw Yelena speaking on an interview that she'd done with Claire Pride, who was on earlier today on France 24, and thought, this is the person we need to have on to talk about anxiety during COVID-19. So very pleased to introduce Yelena Kikmenovic.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much for organizing this and reaching out to me. I'm very glad to participate. So I'm gonna share my screen here. I made very short slides that just gives us a little bit of a framework for what I'm going to be talking about today. So it is, the topic is dealing with anxiety during COVID, but in the spirit of reset and in the spirit of how this current pandemic and crisis can help us maybe even shift our thinking toward emotions in general and mental health in particular. I think that we actually have an incredible opportunity to do so. And some movements that have been happening in my field of mental health for the last couple of decades, I think are very pertinent to what we're dealing with during this crisis. So, okay, just a second here. Okay. So, you know, it's no surprise to any of you that a lot of us are dealing with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. First and foremost, I want to emphasize and overemphasize that fear and anxiety are completely normal and natural responses. They are evolutionarily very predictable, normal responses to the danger, to the threat that we are facing. Threat to our bodies, threats to our minds, threat to our life. Then another big element that is engendering a sort of epidemic of anxiety is the uncertainty. I think we all can appreciate that one of the hardest situations, one of the hardest aspects of the current situation that we find ourselves in is the uncertainty. Uncertainty about things that we have been talking about today. A lot of panelists have talked about, you know, uncertainty when and if the cure and vaccine will be found, how long this quarantine is going to last, how will the world look like when we come back to normal, will we come back to the normal that we know, and so forth and so forth. And then, you know, those are kind of big questions, big uncertainties. And then each of us is dealing with myriad of small uncertainties, right? You know, if, you know, my son is a senior in high school, will they have graduation? Will it ever happen? Will prom ever happen? You know, will they postpone it? Will the university start in the fall, and so forth, so forth. And one of the things we do know in psychology is that uncertainty is really one of the hardest things to adjust to. There's actually some fascinating research that shows that even negative news, while at first we're very affected by it, but we, with time, adjust. Most of us are resilient enough to adjust well to it. Yet the uncertain outcomes are the hardest to bear because, you know, there is not the normal kind of habituation to it. So we have to realize that, you know, in the light of danger we all facing, directly or indirectly, uncertainty that we all facing, isolation that's incredibly hard for well-being, psychological well-being and mental health. As I don't have to mention to anybody, we are social species, and, you know, being on our own or even with few people that we share household with is just not the way we have evolved to be. And then dealing with all the small and big losses. At the highest end, of course, loss of life, loss of dear and near ones to us. And then as we go down the spectrum, all the different losses that we're dealing with: loss of work, loss of stable income, loss of all these different events, in our lives, loss of being able to go down the street and swim in a pool, or eat at a restaurant with your friends, and so forth, so forth. So accumulation. Yes.
Sorry, would you mind just holding your microphone? It's like kind of hitting on your jewelry, and it's making.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Yes,
just
absolutely. Yeah, I'm absolutely. So, in light of dealing with all of this, it is completely natural that we're experiencing not only anxiety and worry, but also sadness, a lot of grief in response to loss, a lot of sadness in response to loss and isolation, a lot of irritability and anger even in response to what we're perceiving as this, almost God's wrath. Why is this happening? Why is this happening to us? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening now? The myriad of emotions, most of which we deem negative. We label them negative because we don't like having them. We don't feel good when we have those emotions, are, showing up for a lot of people a lot of the time, not all the time, not for all the people all the time, but they're showing up a lot. And I want to underline how normal and real and expected that is. And with that in mind, I actually want to go into this idea that we have an opportunity now, given that all these emotions are showing up, to approach, to deal with, to face these emotions in a different way than maybe we have been accustomed to doing. Something that in the Western culture, in America in particular, we have been fond of saying is, I just have to learn how to control my emotions. If I could just control my anxiety. I mean, I can tell you that probably half of clients or patients in our practice, when they come to us seeking help for anxiety, they will say something to that extent. If I could, just kind of figure out how to take this and put it in a box and get rid of it, right? If I can get rid of it, not have anxiety, exert my control of anxiety, I'm going to be fine. Then I'm going to be happy and I can do what I want to do in my life. And while that's a lovely idea, theoretically, one thing we definitely know about it does not work. This goes back way 100 years ago to Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, of course, who operated at the turn of the century. And he observed this very astutely. This phrase is accredited to him. We're not sure exactly was he the first one who uttered it, but he said, what you resist persists. And what he meant by saying that is that when it comes to these unwanted, I won't even call them negative, I'll just call them unwanted emotions, physical sensations, thoughts that are showing up for us quite a bit these days, as we mentioned, when we try to squish them, try to run away from them, try to distract ourselves from them. And we are, very, very good at trying to distract ourselves. We have, I think, never lived in a society that provided more possibilities for distraction, right? From phones to video games, to Netflix binging, to every kind of alcoholic or otherwise made beverage that you can imagine, to different recreational and prescription drugs and so forth and so forth. We have plethora of ways to run away from these uncomfortable, undesirable feelings, sensations, physical sensations, and thoughts. And while at first it might seem like, oh yeah, I've run away, I've escaped, I feel better, temporarily I feel better. The problem is that they do come back with a vengeance. Thus, what you resist persists. It persists in terms of coming back with a vengeance. And that's really the main mechanism that we very, very well know, based on science, maintains anxiety. This is the way you end up with a very severe anxiety. This is the way you end up with anxiety disorder. Avoidance of things that create anxiety that we fear, and avoidance of these internal anxious sensations is exactly the thing that maintains anxiety. And then that's the thing that makes it a problem, right? So, a bit of interesting data. I was reading a report that looked at prescription of psychotropic, meaning psychiatric medications between 15th, like mid-February to mid-March. So that's just beginning of a pandemic and this crisis. And prescriptions for antidepressants, anxiolytics, anti-anxiety medications, and medications for insomnia were all up. In particular for medications, for anti-anxiety medications, it was about 35% actually up. The anti-anxiety medications were up. That's a lot. That's a lot just looking at the 1 month period. And as I said, this was just the beginning. So, people are reaching out for a quick fix. I want to put a caveat here. There's time and place for psychiatric medications. They are, while I'm a therapist and primarily, we do psychotherapy, I collaborate with medical professionals, and absolutely there are times and situations and with people who have, very biological predispositions for more severe mental disorders, or just, very persistent distress that, they would make it very helpful for them to get on medications. However, what this data are telling me is that we are really reaching out for quick fix. We're medicalizing human natural distress. And in a way, by doing that, we're undermining natural human resilience. This is tough. This is tough, and we're going to suffer, and we're going to feel pain, psychological pain, sometimes physical pain. And we should not underestimate the incredible psychological human resilience and reserves of resilience that we can actually rely on and even discover, to our surprise, to be able to actually tolerate these emotions, make them, if not friends, then make them just cohabitants with us, and turn toward things that we actually can do something about and can control, which is our behaviors. So I think that this is really, this unprecedented time is offering us a unique opportunity to actually examine how we relate to psychological distress and how we relate to these, we call them negative emotions. And what would happen if we just acknowledge it, if we open up to them and make room for them and do it, almost like a child, with curiosity and kindness and without judgment. And I'm not saying that this will, turn the switch and they're going to go away. No, that's not the expectation. But the idea is that you actually might realize that you are able to allow these feelings and thoughts and emotions and focus on living the best life that you can live. And turns out, as a side effect of this, you don't end up making things worse. So you kind of stop this what you resist persists phenomena. And in the long run, you don't end up with really severe anxiety or severe depression and so forth. So in practice, I won't spend a long time around this. There are whole papers and therapy approaches that basically are based on this idea. Broadly speaking, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, especially the B of the CBT behavioral approaches, very much talk about how we can do that, how we can stop this very unhelpful cycle of pushing away, avoiding, running away, trying to control things that we cannot be controlled. Even more specifically, in particular, so-called third wave CBT approaches. These are mindfulness and acceptance-based behavioral approaches. Among them, ACT. We like the acronym because it focuses on acting, acceptance and commitment therapy, and similar therapies really at their core talk about how we can relate to our pain in a different way. So not how we're going to change our thoughts and feelings, but how we're going to change how we relate to them. And in practice, there are many, many methodologies, if you want, of how to do that. Mindfulness is a part of it. Mindfulness has, of course, become such a ubiquitous buzzword. And as I like to say, it's not going to cure our ills, far from that. However, it is a very, very useful skill. It's, it doesn't need to be mystified. I think, the demystified mindfulness is just really a way of how you approach present moment, how you approach your present being, so that you are able to notice where your mind goes, so that you notice what's happening with your body, and you're able to deliberately, intentionally to focus on whatever you're deciding to focus on. So instead of, being on autopilot and being mindless, you are able to say, okay, I'm gonna, right now be here present with my child, even if it's for 5 minutes. And, I'll notice my thoughts pulling me away. Oh my God, I have to respond to that email and text to my boss and so forth. And you're feeling kind of that hollow feeling in your stomach as you're starting to get anxious about it. And you can notice all of that. You can be sort of for a second taken away by those thoughts. And then you can catch, metaphorically speaking, your mind and bring it back to what you're deciding purposefully to focus on in the present moment. And you can behave consistent to who you want to be in that moment. And that's all it is. It's a very, very simple concept. And as many brilliant, simple concepts are, much harder to implement, but we get better with exercise like anything else. Turns out that we have also a huge amount of research showing that actually increasing emotional vocabulary, literally increasing vocabulary. I sometimes give sheets of emotional, sheets of paper with emotional words written, or so-called emotional wheel, to my clients when, they're really not able to identify what is it that they're feeling when I ask them. That at best they might be able to say, well, I'm not feeling that well, or I'm, feeling good, I'm feeling bad. Well, okay, what hides in the bad, right? What, is it sad? Is it anxious? Is it angry? Is it disappointed? Is it, what's going on there? And that is lovely. Even on the internet, you can find these emotional wheels. So each emotion then separates into, more finely defined emotions. So we call this emotional granularity or emotional differentiation. And it turns out the better you are at both differentiating your emotions, positive and negative, and labeling them, the better you are able to actually allow this emotional experience to sort of be part of you and wash over you, and not be a victim of your emotions, and not be a sort of a prisoner of your emotions in terms of how you are acting in the world. There are, again, many other approaches. I won't belabor them, but one of the other ones is actually getting into your body. We are, especially in our Western society, we are so used to separating mind and body, right? We go to the gym to practice our bodies, and then we do everything else, just stuck in our minds. And I think that's a really big problem. And I think that our counterparts in the East have gotten this much better for millions of years, really, because mind, body, of course, mind and body are connected very intricately. And, for learning how to relate to emotional experiences differently, I think we need to, and we could do much better connecting with our bodies and feeling, because that's really where a lot of these emotional reactions, this is where emotional pain is felt. It is in our body, and learning to befriend our body and notice things in our body will go a long way. And then, it won't come as a surprise to you, of course, talking in a productive way, writing. We have some, very, very well empirically supported, protocols for writing about your emotions that can, be very helpful, as well as expressing them in all kinds of artistic and creative forms. All of that can go, of course, a long way in doing what I mentioned. And finally, this is where all kind of comes together. When I say focus on why, what do I mean by that is, again, Nietzsche famously said, and I'm paraphrasing, that if we have why of living, we can, we can sustain anyhow, right? And, we can sustain any difficulties. We can figure out how to get through all kinds of hardships, including the hardships that we are all facing right now, if we know why. And so, why I'm saying this, everything comes together here, because if we are able to relate to distress, emotional distress, these difficult thoughts and emotions, in a different way, then we are able to, we're actually kind of freeing ourselves to act in the world according to our values, according to who we want to be as a person, according to how we want to stand with ourselves and other people and our communities and the world. Because, you know, so often on a daily basis, I hear, you know, people in my regular life as well as my clients, you know, say, well, I would like to do that. That's really, you know, that's what makes me tick. I would want to write a novel. I would want to be present for my child, or I would want to, you know, volunteer in my community, so far, but I can't. So what stands between you and living on purpose? Often, you know, sometimes they'll obviously talk about practical limitations, but more often than that, they'll say, well, why can't I have to first get rid of this anxiety or depression or anger, or you know, this sense of being emotionally empty or exhausted from my emotional upheaval. And so if we learn to relate to these emotional experiences in a different way and allow them, then, you know, then again, we are not beholden to them anymore, and we are free to make a choice each moment, each second, each moment, each hour, each day, how to act, how to behave with ourselves and with others. And we start to relate that to, again, you know, who we want to be during this pandemic. You know, when we look back afterwards and think about what kind of person was I during this time, are we going to be proud of who we were? Again, with ourselves and others, and in the community, in our communities. You know, when we celebrate our 80th birthday, you know, and people, you know, have toasts about, okay, so, you know, this person, you know, really stands for this. You know, when we look over our lives, are we going to be, you know, proud, not happy, but just proud, and really will we resonate to what the people are saying about us? So I think we have a chance now to ask those questions. Life has slowed down for a lot of us, and we have a chance to reflect on our priorities, on, you know, what are we focusing on our time and efforts on, and to maybe reconnect, you know, rediscover what gives us purpose and meaning, reconnect to sources of meaning and transcendence, because of course all of us in the end of the day are having to deal with the ultimate anxiety, which is existential anxiety, right? A lot of big thinkers in my field have talked about all anxieties in the end being related to a fundamental existential anxiety, which is fear of death and mortality. And, you know, how do we stand in the face of that is, of course, by finding sources of transcendence. And it, you know, whether it's in purposeful work and creation, whether it's in how we connect with other people, whether it's in relationship to God or other spiritual sources like nature. I think we have a chance to do that more than you know, many other situations in life. We have been thrown by this cataclysmic, in a way, you know, global event to a state which is not everyday state. You know, the existential philosophers talk about us being kind of thrown into a different state of being, where we can kind of look at the existence a little bit from outside in, and we have a chance, I think, to change, you know, how we relate to life. And finally, just wanted to include, you know, some Lifeline sources. I mean, the hotlines, which are, you know, can be life sources for people who really are reaching the point of having very dark suicidal thoughts, and you know, are thinking about possibly self-harm, and or, you know, people who really, you know, need to talk to somebody and find themselves incredibly isolated. The first three are all US sources, but they're really good sources where you can call and get somebody on the other line immediately. And then the further sources are some good links to the main CBT and ACT organizations. And finally, COVID Coach app, which is actually developed by Veterans Administration in America, but it's free. If you go on it, it's actually CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy methods, or put in one app, and that can also help people, again, do some of the things that I've talked about. So please, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Yelena. Thank you so much for that talk. If anybody has any questions, please leave them in the question box, and we'll be vigilant in only allowing people who have actual questions speak this time. One of the things that I'd like to bring up is, maybe talk a little bit about my own experience through this crisis, and some of the things that have helped me. So, since I'd say about a month or so, I have felt some increased tension. I feel it in my, I don't know if this is, other people have this, but I feel it in my chest, like I feel this kind of tension in my sternum. And and this morning I was doing some yoga with some friends online, and like I really felt it. And I was like, geez, like, what is this tension here? And I definitely relate to that anxiety and everything. And one thing that I started doing more regularly is that I had kind of lost habit is daily meditation. And one of the things that I've thought about through this crisis is, especially if you look at here in France, for instance, like the government has access to public television, public media. And it would have been so great if, through this crisis, governments had, through public health guidelines, because, TV stations and the media, they have sort of shifted some of their programming to do like sports on TV, right? You'll have like an hour of aerobics on like whatever TV channel. It would have been great if we would have had guided meditation on public television or on public radio, and getting people in this state of mind where they they begin to learn how to meditate.
Absolutely. And when you talk about, the somebody, almost like somebody standing on your chest, I often hear this description. I feel almost as if there's another person sort of sitting or standing or laying on my chest. That's a very, very typical physical sensation of anxiety, right? That it's almost like, it's kind of an interesting metaphor almost. It's like something is like squeezing us, right? And it's and as you say, very much getting in touch physically with your body. There are a lot of very good mindfulness meditation exercises with like noticing it. One is called body scan. It's going literally from the top of your head down to your toes, or from your toes the other way up, and really noticing what's happening in your body. And you can even accentuate it by squeezing your muscles and then relaxing them and relaxing them again, and noticing the difference. And that's how we start to discern and become more discerning about, what does this mean? And what does this mean? A lot of people asking these days if they're facing very serious anxiety, that they might be going into even what's called panic attacks, right? Which is this really, really intense sense of anxiety where people think they're having a heart attack or dying. And, some of the COVID symptoms, of course, can be similar to that. So I've heard a lot of people, being extra panicked now, with that sense. It's like, oh, not only that am I getting anxious, something going on, but do I have COVID? And then we start to spin in our minds, right? Oh my God, what does this mean? I can't have this. This is not this. I can't tolerate it. This is not okay. And then the more you think about it, and the more again you think this is dangerous and unacceptable, the more anxious you're going to get, the worse you're going to feel physically, and so forth and so forth. So, I think, yes, that mindfulness meditations, as well as similar endeavors like yoga incorporates a lot of, body awareness as well as mindfulness meditations, can go a long way towards, having us again relate to our bodies in a different way. Host is sharing a poll results. So we have mood today. 47% of people are feeling good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this poll has been going out throughout the day, and
it has been going. Okay.
It's been somewhere between good and feeling great. So
okay.
pretty glad for that.
I wonder if there's a little self-selection bias, right? That people who are feeling at least good are feeling like, I'm going to get on these webinars and listen to this and get inspired, versus people who are not feeling that great. They're like, this is too much. I'm barely getting through the day. So it might be, we might be facing a little bit of a self-selection bias.
Yeah. I just gave access to, there's a question in the
Sure.
Go ahead.
Cool. Okay. Hey, Jelena, I'm really enjoying your talk. I agree with what you say, and I think this is an opportunity for us to mature as a species.
Mhm.
And I appreciate how you portray the process-oriented approach. I think that's really cool. Your Jung reference is kind of hilarious to me, where you say what we resist persists, and I
Yes.
think that's a succinct thing for someone with Tourette's.
Mhm. Yes.
Um,
Very much so. Yes. Any repetitive behaviors? Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
yeah. I think it's weird that a lot of people that have mental illness are almost like relieved in this time right now. And it's like the script has been flipped. And what you've been saying really speaks to Thomas Zazz's like narrative theory about how kind of the stories that we tell
Yes.
is reflected in our inner experience. And my question is, if you have any recommendations on how to publicly address mental illness in niche communities. Something I've experienced is like, by being open, I feel bombarded sometimes by people saying that like, you just have to change your mind, or people will shut themselves out. And a lot of people, their theory of mind doesn't necessarily allow for cognitive variance. And yeah.
So your question is how, when you say niche communities, say just a little bit more about that. How to address general approach to mental illness? Kind of, are you meaning how do we get people to be a little more open to approaching these issues in a different way?
I guess sometimes it's like if someone goes with people in the realm of psychology, we have a common vernacular.
Yes.
But let's say like crypto or like social networks and stuff like that, sometimes people get really specific. So I guess in like other words, how can people with mental illness in a niche community integrate with neurotypical?
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Well, you know, so it goes, I think, both ways, right? I want to actually start from the point you made, which is very, very astute observations. And that is that people who are especially anxious normally, like who normally suffer from, you know, anxiety disorders, possibly OCD and so forth, are actually not doing that badly right now. That is absolutely, that gels with the observation that I've had among our patients, as well as talking to other therapists. And I've been very intrigued by that. And I think that can, again, shed some light on your question. I've been intrigued and asked, you know, I've asked a lot of my clients, so how come, you know, everybody else is freaking out, and you're saying, well, you know, I'm no better, but I'm no worse than usual. Even sometimes, you know, maybe a little relieved. And so the answers vary, but they kind of converge on a couple of themes. And one of them is first validation, you know, which just tells us how important it is to sort of validate that these negative emotions are, first of all, ubiquitous, and they're ubiquitous for all of humanity. And some of us are biologically more predisposed to have them, and to have them in stronger amounts than others. It doesn't mean that even people who are who got that, you know, a bad lottery in terms of predisposition for some of the mental disorders, that they also cannot be helped by being more open to the emotional experiences. But it is true that for some people it is tougher. And I think that, you know, unlike physical illness, unlike the diabetes, which, you know, generally speaking, there's not stigma about, and you can say, I have diabetes, and people say, oh my God, I'm really sorry. How are you managing that? You know, is there something that we can do to help you out here in our community, or in the way we do things for birthday parties, in terms of bringing cookies or cakes and so forth? You know, there's no shame in that. There is still this sense of, you know, that, oh, having a mental problem, psychological problem is, you know, it's stigmatized. It's not okay. It's somehow up to a person, you know, completely. And I think that, you know, people with some mental illnesses now feel validated, because everybody else is like feeling the pain, psychological pain, and huge amounts of it. And they're saying, you know, so many people just dismiss me. They don't validate me. They dismiss my pain. They can't even really start to get into my head to understand how my day-to-day life looks like. And now they are living it. And it's also something incredibly validating, which again teaches us how, how important that is. Try to open up to your own experience, but also to the experience of the other person. It's not contagious. Mental illness is not contagious. Open up, ask, figure out, phenomenologically, what is their experience like, and let's get that dialogue going. And I think that, both people, who are suffering, with some mental disorders, and the others can really contribute to this dialogue. And I think this time is such a good example, because now, I hear people who've never had anxiety in their life, almost. I mean, we all have always had some kind of anxiety, but, never had major anxiety in their life. That kind of, those people, phlegmatic, kind of go-lucky people, I always tell them, well, you got lottery in the other direction than most of us, but they are now freaked out. So maybe there's a chance now for them to say, this is how it feels like. Maybe, only maybe, they will be a little more, humble. They will be a little more open to, discussing these experiences of people who deal with this more on a daily basis. So I think, it is an interesting thing that's happening. And there's another thing that a lot of my anxious clients say, is different now. And that is, there is a concrete threat that everybody's focused on. Usually the worried minds, the anxious minds, they go in all kinds of directions. We call it catastrophizing. And they think of as, what ifs in, 10 different, 100 different domains of life. Right now, we are all worried about a very concrete threat, and that there's something clarifying about that. I think that can help. So, I think that, in spite of us in Western societies more than others, I grew up in ex-Yugoslavia myself. My father was actually a psychiatrist, academic psychiatrist, as well as practicing psychiatrist in the state mental health hospital. So I grew up very, very aware of the mental health stigma. This is something that I'm very acutely aware, and realize how much less we have it here and now, living in America, some decades later. And yet it's maybe sometimes even more insidious, because it's kind of under the surface. It's not so obvious, it's not so explicit, and yet it's still, under the surface. So I think, we still have way to go. And I think we all can contribute to this, dialogue and conversation by the way how we relate to our own distress and to the stress of others.
So there's one last question here we'll be able to address before we move on to our last and final speaker of the day. So what is your advice on trying to deal with your own anxieties while trying to stay, quote unquote, together with your loved ones and the people around you?
Yes. Be honest. My first thing is, first piece of advice is be honest. That a lot has been written about what should especially parents do, right? The parents who are dealing with so many stressors, especially if they have small children, they're homeschooling, they're trying often to work from home as well, and they're really, really pushed to the edge. And very distressed themselves, and kids are asking about what's going on, when am I going to go back to school? And I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues who are child psychologists, and some of these things we know from long-term writings and research and practice of psychology, and some of that we're finding out now, really observing how people are coping with this. And the first thing is, while of course you have to be age appropriate, you don't want to be, freaking out children, and telling them things that they cannot comprehend and understand. And, it has to be presented in a level that they can handle. Don't hide, do not hide your negative emotions. Talk to them in developmentally appropriate way. Model that, one can feel sad and will feel sad around this kind of situations. And it's sad we don't get to hang out with our friends. And it's really, hard not to be back at school and doing stuff. And sometimes we really can't sleep well. And that's okay. We can, together we can help each other through this and find creative ways to find small joys and be grateful for what we have. And we can get through this. It's almost like the sense of we are strong enough to get through this. Not like, oh no, don't worry about it, snap out of it, it'll be fine, everything is going to be okay. No, it's hard. And it's okay that it's hard, and it's okay that you're feeling that. I'm feeling it too. And let's two of us do something that can, make us feel like we are strong enough that we can have all those emotions and still do what we can at this point, which is go on a Skype and, talk to your grandma in a nursing home, or go into the garden and, do a little biology project while spending time in the sunshine. So yes, do not, there's actually just an article I read yesterday that came out that showed that parents who work really, really hard at suppressing their emotions, especially arousing emotions, actually the kids pick up on it, and the kids end up actually doing worse psychologically, because when we think it's a hard job trying to suppress the emotional expression and emotions, and it seeps through, and kids are so good at picking up stuff, and so even if we don't say it, they'll pick up on it, but then they will process it in a way that it's not going to be facilitated by us. So
thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for sharing all this incredible advice. Where can people find you and people find your work?
If you Google Dr. K psychologist, I'll show up, or Dr. K psychologist, Washington, D.C. My website comes up. It's all there.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Yelena.
Thank you so much for having me, Sebastian.
Have a good day.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Keep safe.